When you're someone like me who spends a lot of time digging through old newspapers, it always surprises when you find things that were at one point front page news, important to everybody, but now seem to be completely forgotten. I guess that's a good lesson for us today as we fixate on one news story or another, only to completely forget about it while we roll into a different news cycle. But sometimes it leaves you to wonder what happened to someone who was famous and then suddenly just faded from the news. One such example is a girl that used to be known throughout the nation as the cleverest jewel thief in the country, the cat-eyed girl with 100 names. Famous one day, or rather infamous, forgotten the next. Very little is known about the early life of the woman who came to be known as the cat-eyed girl. Based on her reported age, she was born around 1882, but she gave differing answers as to where. A probation officer in Buffalo, New York said that she was born in Ireland and was brought to the United States at the age of 8. In the 1930 United States Census, her birthplace was listed as Kentucky, but 10 years later, the 1940 census lists her birthplace as Ohio. A 1923 article claims she was born in southern Illinois. The probation officer, presumably telling a story that he'd heard from the girl himself, said that her life took a turn when she was 21, and she fell in love with the rakish thief, Edward Jones. The probation officer knew the cat-eyed girl as Martha Connors, but the name she seems to have gone by most often was Lillian McDowell. Complicating any attempt to discover her identity, she went by at least dozens of names in the years that she was an active thief, regularly giving out a string of aliases like Elise Webb, Clara Stratton, and Helen King. Her alleged husband, Edward Jones, had a list of aliases as well, including G.H. Grant and Jim McDowell. Her nickname is easier to trace. She was called the Cat-Eyed Girl, Cat-Eyed Lil, and Cat-Eyed Annie, owing to peculiar eyes. They're almost always described as different colors, one blue and one brown. Her most unique peculiarity was a cast in her left eye, a defect described as a yellow bar. The left eye is also described as split into two colors, blue and chestnut. A 1914 description in the Ogden, Utah Standard Examiner goes, her left eye was of 4 colors, and the pupil dilated or contracted according to the occasion. A different article said that the nickname came merely from her lynx-like expression. But she first found newspaper headlines when the alleged husband, Edward Jones, was arrested in December of 1908 in Pittsburgh for an audacious robbery. In broad daylight, Jones smashed open the window of a jewelry store, grabbing thousands of dollars worth of diamonds before taking off on foot. 2 newsboys gave chase, and one was Ralph O'Kane. The victim of a streetcar accident, O'Kane was described as a legless boy who travels in a sort of carriage he propels with his arms. When Jones tripped, the tenacious Ralph leapt onto him and hung on to his prisoner until a policeman arrived. After rather embarrassingly having been run down by a newsboy with no legs, Jones was sentenced to 5 or 10 years for the crime. Later that month, however, Lillian McDowell was arrested in Chicago. Found her apartment was a complete set of tools for blowing safes by the nitroglycerin process. Police alleged that Lillian had assisted her husband by distracting the jewelry store owner before slipping away. After her arrest, she attempted to kill herself 3 times before she could be tried. Ultimately, at trial, McDowell was found not guilty by a jury, as the shop owner could not identify her. Another report said that she was found not guilty as whatever act she had committed, the law supposed her to have acted under her husband's coercion. But that was allegedly not Lillian McDowell's first brush with crime. The Cleveland Plain Dealer reported an earlier diamond theft in New York in 1906, although she seems never to have been charged for it. In September 1907, she approached the Dyer family in St. Louis, introducing herself as Clara Stratton. From the first moment, I was in love with her, Mr. Dyer said. It was like a dream to find a bright, cultured girl in a menial capacity. The children idolized her. After working for only 3 days, she pried open his desk with a screwdriver and absconded with $6,000 worth of jewels and valuables. Her MO was to arrive in a city and advertise that she needed a maid. She would meet them in a hotel room, accept their references, and then tell the prospective maids to meet her in a few days. And instead, with their references in hand, she approached the wealthiest families in the city and offered her services as a maid. And after a short time, usually only a few days, she would disappear with all the family's valuables. She repeated the Dyer robbery at the home of Joseph Hayes in St. Louis in February of 1908. 1910 was a big year. She stole $1,000 from the Hofellers in Buffalo, and police in Ohio later connected her to a $10,000 robbery of H.E. Hayes. In March, she stole another $3,000 worth of jewels from E.L. Camp in Toledo. In late November 1910, she approached Ira J. Mix in Chicago, answering an ad for a maid. Armed with impeccable references, she was hired, but after 10 days of working, she disappeared, along with $3,200 worth of jewels and money. She made several big mistakes, however, in the Mix robbery. She stole a handbag from Mrs. Mix and left her own handbag behind, with a letter addressed to her mother, Lillian Redmond. She kept the bag and was holding it in December 1910 at a department store when Detective James Connick of the Chicago Police, Society Detective Richard Joyce, and a Pinkerton superintendent caught her. The first in a series of 3 sensational trials began, this one for the robbery of the Dyers. The evidence was described as circumstantial, and the jury acquitted her thanks to the work of her lawyer, who convinced the jury that she wasn't even in Missouri at the time. Oddly, jurors were dubious of witnesses who identified her for being too positive of her identification. But it was a short respite, because she was immediately tried for the Joseph Hayes robbery. This time the situation was more complicated. She was tried twice, and both times the jury deadlocked, unable to convict. But still the ordeal wasn't over. She was arrested just outside the courtroom, this time to go to Chicago to face trial for the Mix robbery. By then she was already a nationally famous thief. The Buffalo Courier reported that police say that she stole more than $100,000 worth in many cities. And the St. Louis Globe-Democrat published a list provided by police that connected her to robberies in 13 different cities, with a growing number of people identifying her as the maid who robbed them. Her luck ran out. In April, after only 10 minutes of deliberation, she was convicted by a jury of the Mix robbery. She was given an indeterminate sentence and sent to the penitentiary at Joliet, Illinois. On the way to the jail, she attempted to throw herself in front of a train, and in a scuffle stabbed a jailer in the arm with a hat pin. She seems to have remained imprisoned there for about 2 years before she was sent to Buffalo to face more charges. She put on a show there, claiming that she'd been horribly mistreated in Joliet and that her old spirit of daring had been broken. Her pleas for mercy were heard, and she was given probation. She made a positive impression on her probation officer. Her record was good enough that when she asked to go to live with her mother in Chicago, the probation officers agreed. Unfortunately, she was trailed by private detectives from burglary insurance companies, and when they found her in Chicago, they arranged to have her arrested and brought to Toledo for the robbery she committed there. The Buffalo probation officer wrote a letter of support, arguing that she was sincere in her wish to lead a good, straight life, and that she was now harmless as a cat. Later, he may have regretted those words. Tried in Toledo, she was again found guilty in October 1913 and given a sentence in the Ohio State Penitentiary. In December, she attempted to escape by arranging a dummy under her blanket in her cell, which she hid in a closet, but prison guards saw through the ruse. She was released in October 1915. Several articles also mention that she was brought to Pittsburgh in 1917 and sentenced to 3 years there in the Western Penitentiary. Contrary to her probation officer's claim, she apparently was either not interested or could not return to a normal life. It's possible that she was back to her ways as early as 1920, when $3,510 worth of jewels was stolen by a maid from a Philadelphia society woman in a theft that mimics McDowell's, although she doesn't seem to have been suspected. However, she was suspected in the 1920 robbery of Eleanor Beebe in Boston, and by September 1921 had moved across the country to Minnesota, where she was involved in the robbery of the entire stock of silver and all of Mrs. Folk's jewelry, valued at $5,000. She was said to have decamped in an automobile with a man. She was suspected in several other robberies in Minneapolis around the same time. The next year, she was sought as Elsie Webb after she found employment with the McKay family in St. Louis. After a short time working for them, she locked Mrs. McKay in a closet after menacing her with a revolver and disappeared. Her national fame grew again as she entered a cross-country spree of robberies. On April 10th, she stole $25,000 from a home in Cleveland, and a week later had robbed another $17,000 from a home in nearby Cleveland Heights. Her spectacular crimes earned her sensational reporting. She was called the Woman with 100 Names and was wanted in more than 100 cities. Cat-Eyed Lil became a regular presence on the front page. In May of 1922, she was back in Minneapolis and got a job as a maid with C.F. Deaver. One morning at 10:30 a.m., she answered the door and let in 3 men who forced Mrs. Deaver into an upstairs room. Initially, it was believed that the maid had been kidnapped, but police quickly surmised that the thorough search of the house was aided by McDowell's knowledge, and the Minneapolis Star even reported that she had planned and directed the raid. Another $10,000 was added to her tally. In April of 1923, she hit a Baltimore home, stealing $20,000 worth of valuables, and several months later robbed Mrs. Henry Lind in Melrose Park, Pennsylvania, of another $3,000. It was in December of 1923 that McDowell completed her greatest theft, a whopping $75,000 haul from the home of Louis J. Surdam of Buffalo, New York. Under the name Harriet McCoy, she secured a position with the Surdams and then stole the fortune after working for only a week. According to Mrs. Surdam, only she knew the combination to the safe, but earlier that evening she had allowed the maid to close it for her. Called the most daring and shrewd female crook in the country and said to have picture in every rogues gallery in the country, the Surdam robbery was described as the easiest and largest haul she ever made. Of course, growing notoriety came with risk. Circulars were sent all over the country advising people not to hire a cat-eyed girl seeking employment as a maid. Between the various police departments, rewards of thousands of dollars were offered for her capture. She was even suspected of a robbery in California, although the description doesn't match her. Like any good story of cops and robbers, it was only a matter of time before McDowell was caught. In September of 1925, Detective Sergeant Arthur Burns of Milwaukee happened to look up on a streetcar to find that he recognized a woman standing near him from rogues gallery photos. He followed McDowell to the home of a wealthy Milwaukeean, where she was employed as a servant, and arrested her. Though she wasn't wanted in Milwaukee, she was wanted in at least 9 other cities, according to reports. Milwaukee police offered her up on a first-come, first-served basis, and police departments around the country pressed their rights. Buffalo was the first, and on October 7, 1925, she left Milwaukee. Again, she attempted to win sympathy with frequent fainting spells and wails, but failed to find mercy. A week later, she pleaded guilty to first-degree grand larceny. For her part, she claimed she came to Milwaukee because she finally wanted to go straight. Though her criminal career appeared over, it wasn't the last time she would make headlines. Before she was even sentenced, she escaped the Erie County Jail, jumping out of a second-floor sheriff's office. She had pocketed a key after being briefly handed the jail matron's keys to unlock a cupboard. She was captured within 24 hours, her ankle swollen to 3 times its natural size. She was reported boasting that if her ankle hadn't broken, they'd have never caught her. Other reports say that her injuries were quite serious. The bone had actually pierced the skin. She was immediately sentenced, this time to 10 years hard labor at the state penitentiary in Auburn. "No prison can hold me," she allegedly said upon hearing the sentence. She did her best to prove that statement true. On May 10, 1926, her cell was found empty, her mattress full of bricks and stone. A hole under her bed had led into the prison yard. She accomplished the jailbreak by committing minor infractions of the prison rules so that she might be confined in one of the solitary cells. After a month, with a knife stolen from the kitchen, she forced her way out. She'd found a long plank which she used to climb the tall wall and vaulted to freedom. She was free for only 24 hours when she was caught 8 miles from the prison. A second attempt was foiled by a guard who found her climbing over the wall. She was declared insane and sent for 2 years to the Mattawian State Hospital for the criminally insane, but was returned to Auburn, supposedly because she caused constant trouble in 1929. In 1930, she escaped again, just as audaciously as ever. She cut the wood around the lock in her cell on the 2nd floor and was able to slip through the floor below unseen. Finding a coat and fedora hat belonging to the warden, she donned the disguise and simply walked out of the prison. She was captured again after only 7 hours. To prevent her escape, a special 3-ton metal door was made, the Cat-Eyed Annie Gate. She seems to have faced the rest of her sentence in relatively quiet resignation and was released in 1935 into the waiting arms of more police and judges. She was tried and convicted in Baltimore, but the judge offered the now 53-year-old woman mercy, suspending the sentence. She was next taken to Boston, where she was similarly given a suspended sentence, but the judge in Missouri wasn't quite so lenient. For the robbery of the McKay family, she was initially given 12 years. The judge showed what mercy he had by shortening the sentence to 8 years. She was held in the Missouri State Penitentiary in Jefferson City, a notoriously harsh prison. Unlike her previous stints in prison, she doesn't seem to have made waves and was released 5 years later when her sentence was commuted. Cat-eyed Lil never seemed the type to simply fade away, but that is exactly what she did. What happened to the notorious thief after she was released from prison in 1941 is unknown. There were several attempts by reporters over the coming decades to track her down, but she seems to have walked out of prison and into obscurity. Maybe she chose another alias. Maybe Lillian McDowell was never her name. Maybe some portion of what she stole, much of which was never recovered, was waiting for her somewhere. We'll probably never know the true extent of her crimes or how much she stole, but she was famous enough that her name would come up for years afterwards whenever there was a similar kind of burglary. It seems bizarre that a woman that was once a household name, the cat-eyed girl who committed robberies all across the country and stole what today would be valued in the millions of dollars, could simply walk away, leaving we historians nothing to remember her by except faded headlines in old newspapers. I hope you enjoyed watching this episode of The History Guy, and if you did, please feel free to like and subscribe and share The History Guy with your friends. And if you also believe that history deserves to be remembered, then you can support The History Guy as a member on YouTube, a supporter on our community at Locals, or as a patron on Patreon. You can also check out our great merchandise shop, book a special message from The History Guy on Cameo.